You're listening to the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe, a podcast of curated conversations with C-suite leaders and those who support organizational growth and development. Get ready for inspiring interviews, educational lessons, and thought-provoking discussions that will challenge you to execute something new and innovative that will drive results in your organization. And now, here's Dr. Tanya Lowe.
Hello, you're listening to the Results Driven Organizations podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe. Using my results driven philosophy of strategy, leadership, teams, and customer experiences, I help organizations develop their best kept secret, their human capital. This podcast is designed to expand the conversation with C-suite leaders and those who support organizational growth and development, and what it really takes to create, develop, and maintain results-driven and high-performing organizations. I'm so excited about our guest today. Our guest today is Elaine Hering. Elaine is a renowned expert in leadership development, communication, and organizational culture. She's dedicated to helping leaders create environments that support rather than silence people, while empowering individuals to use their voices effectively. Her best-selling book, Unlearning Silence: How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully, a USA Today bestseller and Publishers Weekly Buzz book, explores how silence undercuts teams, leadership, and lives, offering practical strategies for positive change. I know several of you need to just go ahead and add this book to your list right now. It's a must read, I'm telling you. With a global reach spanning 6 continents, Elaine has helped countless professionals build skills in negotiation, influence, and conflict management. Her expertise is further evidenced by her teaching roles in executive education programs at prestigious institutions, including Harvard, Dartmouth, Tufts, UC Berkeley, and UCLA. She's a busy lady. Her impressive client roster includes industry giants such as American Express, Capital One, Google, IBM, Merck, Nike. The list goes on and on. Elaine brings a personal touch to her professional endeavors, living and working on Ohlone land, drawing from her personal experiences as a young female non-white professional. Elaine is on a mission to ensure that those with subordinated identities know they're not the only one. Elaine, welcome to RDO.
I'm so grateful to be here. And I just need to listen to that intro over and over. You have the best energy and voice. Thank you for that gift.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We were already talking in the green room, right? In our green room. So we've been connected on LinkedIn for a while. I've been reading your post, and I was so excited about your book. And I was like, we need to talk about this because it's a big deal. It's a big deal in organizations. As I was reading your intro, your bio, I was thinking about a client that I have now where silence is pretty much kind of like the weeds within the organization. It's sucking people out. You guys need to read this book right away. So I'm just going to jump right in. Can you explain the core concept of unlearning silence and why it's particularly relevant in today's workforce?
Silence is everywhere. And silence is at play on your team, in your org, in your leadership, even in your life, whether or not you're going to acknowledge it. And if you're not paying attention to it, it is usually undermining your relationships, undermining your leadership, whether people trust you, whether you're getting accurate information, and it's sending messages to people that you may not intend to send. So I'm trained as a lawyer. Let's back up with some definitions. What do
Okay.
I mean by silence? Because some people are like, silence is golden. It's great. I need to meditate more. Yes. And the silence I'm talking about is when you feel like you have to bite your tongue in order to keep the peace. When you have to censor yourself to make yourself palatable to the people who hold power. It is when there's not enough room in the conversation for your preferences, needs, goals, hopes, and concerns, because everybody else has already sucked all the energy out of the room.
Mm.
And maybe that definition itself makes the connection to your last question of why does it matter so much today?
Mm-hmm.
And the damaging part of silence is the mainstream conversation has been if you're not getting heard at work, you need more confidence, you need more courage, you need to be more assertive. Maybe you need to be less assertive, right? Go take some training course to help you have those difficult conversations. Now, I've taught those training courses and then made the observation of some people still don't have the difficult conversation. Some people still don't give or receive the feedback, no matter how much their manager or HR told them they should. So I started to ask, why is that? And I landed on silence. Because the less we talk about things, the less it seems like we talk about things here, the more what organizational psychologists call employee silence or organizational silence becomes true. That definition, organizational silence, is the collective phenomenon of saying nothing because you believe it is futile.
I wish I had that definition yesterday. I wish I had
We
that.
got you.
I experienced it within a client organization.
Yeah.
And I kept saying, this is a systemic problem. But organizational silence. Thank you for giving me the words, because I know it's happening in my client's place. And I know it's happening in organizations across this country.
Yeah. And let's name some symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
Because often we solve for the symptoms rather than the root cause. Some of the symptoms are in the meeting, everybody sort of nods and stays silent, even if the leader's asking questions. And then the real conversations happen in the meeting after the meeting.
The parking lot.
The parking lot, the bathroom,
Mm-hmm.
Slack, whatever it
Little
is.
puddles. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The meeting after the meeting. Okay, that's one symptom. Another symptom, people talk about each other rather than to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If I have an issue with you, I'm not coming to you. I'm going to everybody else except for you. And maybe we do some triangulation if we're going to be fancy and have you talk to the other person, but then things get lost in a game of telephone. Another symptom, we spend our energy tiptoeing around one another, trying not to ruffle feathers, and doing workarounds instead of just doing the work.
Yeah.
And it sucks energy out of the system, and it feels brittle, and it feels like you can't breathe, and you're really constricted. And, that silence can come from a bunch of different places. To me, it is multi-layered, meaning it is the silence I have learned. What scar tissue do I have from the way I grew up, from my past workplaces that lead me to think it's not worth it or safe to speak up here? That may or may not be true of my current workplace or true of my current leader. Then there are the ways that even well-intentioned leaders silence the very people they so often want to support. Right? You have leaders who say, my door is always open. We can talk about why that phrase is problematic. We have leaders who say, I'm here. I want to support you. Just tell me how. And they hear nothing from their people.
Yeah.
And then do the anonymous employee survey and still hear nothing. And then get frustrated being like, you know what? I've asked. I've done the all hands. I did the ask me anything. I'm done with it.
Yeah.
Right. There was some cursing in there that I edited out.
Yes.
It wasn't sure if we do that here on audio.
We do. We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm done. Why can't you do? And so there's that piece. In what ways do we as leaders, however well-intentioned we are, end up silencing the people we lead? And third is, in what ways is silence baked into the systems we're all part of? Because the policies, why are we still in 2024 talking about return to office, and why is it such a lightning rod issue? Because the policy choice supports some people who know how to lead traditionally in person and who are paying the rents on these very expensive office buildings and
Yes.
decent commutes. And it silences or makes it exponentially harder for the people who benefit from the flexibility, have more caregiving responsibilities, have longer commutes, are dealing with micro or macro just aggressions in the workplace. Policies are not neutral. Policies either support or silence people. And so each of those, the silence I've learned, the ways that people silence me or that I silence other people, and the way it's baked into the systems, those are all the different aspects we need to look at in terms of a healthy culture, in terms of being able to unleash talent, right? For people to really bring their expertise, ideas to work, and frankly, to have fulfilling lives.
Elaine, I have so many spin-off questions I want to ask you from that.
Let's go wherever you want.
Just from that, right? Just from that could be an entire workshop, training, conversation, TV show, talk show on its
You want to have
own.
Oprah call me, I'm all for it.
Right. So we've talked about what it is. We've talked about how it manifests. What are the hidden costs of silence in organizations?
So I love that phrasing. What are the hidden costs? Because the costs are not hidden to the people who are bearing them. So the hidden costs are inefficiency, lack of productivity, disengagement, quiet quitting, all of these things, team engagement, retention, turnover, job satisfaction, less productivity in terms of outputs and less efficiency in how quickly you get things done because you're spending time doing the workarounds and spending time biting your tongue to not piss them off, to do the calculation, all these things. But the costs that we don't talk about as much are how damaging it is to the people who feel silenced. And that internal, really pain that ends up manifesting. What I mean by that is if I am told explicitly or implicitly that my voice doesn't matter, that if I have a good idea that I think could improve things, you don't want to hear it. Over time, it is just a quick hop and a step away from I'm the problem. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthwhile. Particularly if we look around and don't see anyone else who looks like me, and we see all of the double standards that I know we all navigate at work and the biases that are real and true, that if no one else is talking about things, then it is easy for me to internalize the message that I'm the problem. Particularly when it's framed as go fix yourself, right? Be more assertive, then maybe we can talk, have more executive presence, then maybe we can promote you or consider you or pay you equitably, maybe. But we also know that often the goalpost ends up getting changed after you do the things that you are asked.
After you do the things, right?
After you do the things. So is it really a hidden cost? It's often just not visible to everyone. And it has such a long tail. I'll use my own story, own example, right? In the last organization that I was a full-time partner at, we had a lot of conversations, a lot of wait your turn. My hair started to fall out. I started to break out in hives, dealing with insomnia. And I think we end up doing a lot of self-talk, like just be the bigger person. If I were a better person, if I were a stronger person, I could deal with it. I've got to be more patient, more loving, more caring, more flexible, whatever it is. Versus our bodies know. Our bodies know that something is not okay, something is not right. And all of that self-talk that can go in multiple directions can often have us internalize it versus actually solve for the real issue. So to me, the hidden costs are both bottom line business results as well as damage to human beings that the company doesn't often see because you're employed and maybe you're dissatisfied to the point that you find a new opportunity and you leave. And maybe we don't do exit interviews around here anyways. Maybe even if we do exit interviews, you don't believe that we'll take it seriously and you've already lined up something else. So you don't tell us because there's no track record of us listening to you in the first place. So then the company never actually knows and they just think, oh, Dr. Tanya, she's found a great another opportunity. And then other people leave and there's oh, well, that happens in business. And we never find out that I did not feel respected. I did not feel safe. I did not feel like I could do my best work here because of the ways that people interacted with me or because we didn't account for differences in wiring and how we communicate, because we didn't stop to question, why do we have that 9 a.m. meeting? And why does it have to be a meeting? Particularly if we're working globally and that's actually 1 a.m. for someone else. We're not on even playing ground and it has really disproportionate impacts. Do we have those conversations? So to me, the costs are there, but they're often hidden or not visible. Or we also choose not to see them because it's an easier story to tell of, oh, it's regular attrition. It's within the range.
Wow. And then when it affects everyone, when everyone takes the silence approach, it stops growth. Yeah. It stops movement. Nothing can get done. There's so much apathy.
Yes. It stops movement. To me, it stops productive movement. It certainly stifles innovation. What you end up getting, though, is leaders operating based off of a skewed sense of reality. And what I mean by that is, this is Hirschberg's work from the 1970s. In an organization, you have 3 choices to voice. He goes voice, exit, or loyalty. So if you are building a culture of voice where people's opinions, perspectives are welcome, even if they're different from one another, their working styles are different, and that's fine and welcome, then people stick around and they can stick around to use their voice and are willing to use their voice. If voice does not seem like it is welcome, then the people who line up another job exit. They choose a different adventure. Why would I keep hitting my head against a brick wall if you don't want my perspective anyways? So then the people who can leave, and the people you're left with are the ones who are loyal, who tell you what they think you want to hear.
Yes.
Is how we get to group think and skewed senses of reality,
yes.
Which is also how you end up getting Boeing planes that are not as safe as they need to be.
Yeah.
And basically every corporate scandal in the last 200 years.
Elaine, as you're talking, I'm thinking about so many organizations that I've worked with. And one in particular I comes to mind where I know if one of the employees were sitting here, they would check off several of these boxes. Yeah. So my question with that is, what does a leader do when it is the other person?
Say more of what you mean by that.
So I'm speaking up. I may be new to an organization. I'm speaking up, but my approach is brash, harsh, and it makes people kind of push back. And so now when I speak over a period of time, no one wants to hear me.
Yeah.
And so, and I might be asking the tough questions. I might be adding a value, but because I'm so harsh, no one wants to hear me. So now I'm isolated, I'm pushed back, I'm quiet quitting, and all of that. Can you speak to that, and where does that fit in?
Yeah, to me, nothing is a solo sport, and it is never all on one person. So I'm always looking for leverage points. Meaning, and when you're describing that, I'm like, oh, a neon sign, tone policing, tone policing. What do we do with that?
Yeah.
There is culture fit, there's culture add, right? And you're always reading the room. And as a matter of influence, trying to figure out how, A, how does the system work? B, how can I operate within it most effectively? So I would have a conversation with this person to say, hey, I hear really good intent. I hear you asking questions that we need to wrestle with. Here's what's I think is getting in the way of it, and what I might try to help other people hear what I know is incredibly valuable of what you're sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because we all have really high BS detectors, you've got to actually believe that before you think, right? Because the other leverage point is, how can I, as an individual,
Mm-hmm.
work through my own biases and triggered reactions to hear this person better?
Mm-hmm.
And then how can I help the people in this pre-existing system who may not be used to this level of directness or emoting
Mm-hmm.
to also stretch and hear, right? It's, to me, it's not either or. It's not you have to speak in this way to be heard here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because the constant learning and growth is, how do we evolve together? How do we not stay stagnant? How can we not make it a prerequisite that you have to speak in this way in order to be heard here?
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, there's acknowledgement of a pre-existing culture and structure of this tends to work, this tends to be triggering. That is how we help a person develop self-awareness of how they might be coming across so that they can make choices going forward of how they want to show up. But the work is multiple fold, right?
Yes.
As they are making those choices, I am also really interrogating, am I triggered by this because they're wrong or because it's new to me?
Mm.
Am I triggered because it's uncomfortable? Do I even realize I'm triggered? Let's start there.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely.
Right? Because, and this to me is the dance of, we each have a responsibility, especially as leaders, especially as CEOs, of what culture are we building and how do we not just say the things that we think are supposed to be said, but our actions demonstrate, I value your perspective. And I gotta be honest, I'm taking a minute because this is more direct than I'm used to. And I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
Because we probably need to hear it.
I think I love this approach because I think it allows, we always talk about, I want to show up as my authentic self. And I think we're so far away. We're still learning what that looks like in the workplace and how it fits. And I
What
think
the limits are.
and what the limits are. Yeah. And so as I hear this, I think, I'm just thinking about, okay, I just need to get a box of these books for, for people. And we just need to have a book study, right? Because you have to examine the culture, the current culture, right? I have a client just brought on someone, they have amazing ideas, but their approach, it's like you're not going to get any, it's like, okay, you need to kind of tether that. You've got some amazing ideas, but you got to tether it within the culture that you're in.
Yeah.
Until as they're growing up, right? Like you didn't walk into a full innovative, we're doing all this creative stuff. That's not the mid-market company that you've walked into. You walked into a company that they've been around, they've got a little leverage, but they're still kind of horse and buggy. So
yeah.
So yeah.
And it to me is a change management process. And change management is, how do I meet my quote unquote stakeholders where they're at?
Yeah.
Right? While also pushing, but knowing where I am in the journey.
Yeah.
And that I don't get impatient and burn out and quit. And then they bring in someone else who's the new flavor of the month. And then over time, we have calcification of the person with the new ideas. I just got to outlive them, outstay them here. Right? I deal with a lot of that, particularly in nonprofit
Yes.
organizations.
Yes.
Because then it makes the change management, which is just growth, and growth not in numbers or scale, but in how do we evolve? How do we get better at what we do?
In thought process, in systems, in
Yeah, it makes it
structure.
so much harder.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when you haven't had it, right?
It's new, it's uncomfortable. Are we having the meta conversation of this is normal? This is normal for like, I'm the new kid on the block.
Yeah.
We're trying to figure each other out.
Yeah.
I may not rub you the right way, and I hope you'll tell me that rather than just gossip about me.
Yeah.
Because if I don't know how it's landing, I'm just guessing based on the looks on your faces, the silence in the meeting,
Yeah. Yeah.
how quickly you reply to my emails or not. But can we have that meta conversation of, you know what, that really pissed me off? Really? Oh my gosh, say more. Because
Yeah.
I'm trying not to piss you off. So I must have, there's something I'm missing. But that, whether it's a dating relationship, whether it is a workplace, we are learning one another. And learning one another does not mean you acculturate and just fit into the system. We wouldn't have hired you to not push the envelope, to not evolve, to not grow together. It also doesn't mean the organization day 1 or day 30 or day 300 is already where you are. Different people.
Right. Right. Oh my God. This is so good. So, Elaine, we've talked a lot about the foundation and some of the side effects of silence. How can managers or leaders encourage team members who've been historically marginalized or silenced to find and use their voice effectively? And I want to add something to that, because if I'm a leader and I've never been taught that, in order for me to help somebody else with it,
Yes.
I've got to learn the skills. So let's back up and start there. How does the leader who's listening to this, how did they learn what they need to learn in order to encourage their team members to learn this and continue forward?
So I hesitate to say this. I'm giving you the meta conversation because it sounds self-serving. But I actually would have the leader read my book, Unlearning Silence.
I agree.
It's a free discussion guide on my website that I know will link in show notes, to have the conversations, to have language, because so often it just feels like friction and frustration, or like, why won't you say anything? But to say, in what ways might I be unintentionally silencing you? In what ways have you felt silenced before, whether at this workplace or not, gives us language to say, what's going on here? And by the way, it's not you. We're not pointing fingers. It's this thing called silence that we all need to solve for together. And I would start with the leader of check yourself. Because chapter 5 is about the ways that we silence other people. And the first way that we silence people is that we fail to realize how hard it can be for someone else to speak up.
Yes.
To share an idea, to disclose an identity. I mean, there's a whole lot of conversation in workplaces about accommodations. Do I disclose that I'm autistic or that I have a non-apparent identity because of how people will make assumptions about me, right? That is masking or silence.
Right.
So if you didn't grow up struggling with speaking, if you have always been accepted, your voice, your presence, your identities have been normed, you're part of the dominant group, it makes sense that you wouldn't understand in the same way. what it feels like to be silenced or how hard it would be to use your voice. So there's just an awareness.
Right.
And it boils down to we're different people with different life experiences,
Absolutely.
which we know when we stop and think about it, but is not how we end up operating day to day.
Mm-hmm.
With that awareness of we're all different, I would be asking, in what makes it easiest for you, team member, to share your thoughts and insights, because I really want to hear them.
Yeah.
Right? You're doing something. It's an expression of intent and a curiosity to understand their wiring.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, I break down a bunch of different ways, right? Are you a morning person? Are you a night person? Is your power hour actually midday? Which always surprises me because I'm a morning person. I was like, I don't understand how anyone doesn't have the post-lunch slump. And some
Yes.
people are like, that's like 1 o'clock. That is, I'm firing on all cylinders. And I'm like, you're weird. But that, that's our natural human instinct
Absolutely.
is you're not like me. Oh, that's weird. Versus it's just different.
It's just different.
Or another way that people are wired differently is we are either real-time processors, meaning the more we talk something out, the clearer idea gets, or we are post-processors, meaning you're in a meeting, you can't quite figure out what to say, but 20 minutes after the meeting, you're like, that's what I wanted to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so often it feels like, all right, the meeting's over, right? The conversation's moved on. I don't want to be that person. Do I reply all on the email? Do I not? Versus a leader knowing, okay, your power hours in the morning. So that's when I'm going to get your best thinking. And you're a post processor. So it would probably benefit for us to, maybe I don't say, let's jump on a call. Maybe it's, we'll sort it. I'll leave the question for you in Slack. You mull it over. Maybe you communicate more easily by texting and typing rather than talking, right? Are we factoring in all of those things that become barriers to entry, barriers to engagement, barriers to conversation? When what happens is if we're not actively designing the way that we work and the way we communicate, we default to the patterns and preferences of the people with the most organizational, institutional, or hierarchical power.
Yeah.
Or we just inherited that meeting and we have no idea why we do it.
Yeah.
And it's 25 people on Zoom and everyone hates it. You know that you can actually try something new.
You can try something new. We can go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
I just did a training on a multi-generational workplace. And as you were talking about, we're just different. It's not, oh my God, I can't believe you like to talk on the phone. Oh my God, I can't believe you like to text all the time. We're just different. We have our preferences. How do we meet in the middle? And work together? I love the concept of understanding what's your power hour, and are you a post processor? I'm finding many people are post processors.
Yeah.
Especially if they're not used to speaking up or they're not comfortable speaking up.
Totally.
I'll do focus groups and they won't say anything, but maybe sometimes I'll get an email.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so let's think about meeting design and also why. Why do we not tend to hear from post processors? Because in the workplace, post processing is considered a weakness. On your performance review, you get the advice that you need to be quicker on your feet, right? You're supposed to speak in 3 succinct bullet points in real time. These are all the norms and the things that we pride.
Absolutely. Yes.
As leaders, we need to ask the question, do we want the best ideas or do we just want the loudest and fastest ideas? This is quick and slow thinking, right? To do Kahneman's work. And in terms of wiring, if I'm the leader, how different would it be if I said at the end of the meeting, all right, here's where I think we're heading. Everyone sleep on it. As you post-process, reply all on the email and let us know what comes up. You're doing a couple of things. You're normalizing post-processing. We're just wired differently. You're telling people exactly how to continue the conversation, reply all, versus do I text? Do I pick up the phone? Do I just write the leader, but then I'm leaving out other people? And then
do I remain silent?
Well, all of those questions and not knowing incentivize us to stay silent.
Yeah. So the leader then sets the tone. So and now that the leader has some understanding on or some new tools, if you
Yep.
will. So now the leader can start using this language because I
Yep.
think your book provides language that leaders can use. The power hour, the post processing, the meeting design, taking all of that into account
Yeah.
will set the tone for people to speak easier
Yeah, you know,
or
it's
to speak.
to reduce the barriers
Mm-hmm.
speaking, to
Yeah.
reduce the barriers to using your voice.
Mm-hmm.
The other effect is that it makes it discussable,
Yeah.
right? Which we usually just don't talk about these things, and we figure it out by trial and error over time, with a lot of jabbing and hurt elbows, by the
Mm-hmm.
way. Um, but it makes it discussable. And I want to go back to this idea because I could hear some leaders being like, "Ah, I have to meet in the middle." Or like, how do I meet in the middle if I've got a team of 7 and they all have different preferences?
Mm-hmm.
So being able to discuss them, name them, discuss them, doesn't mean that you can only then talk with Dr. Tanya in this way. You can only text her in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's too rigid versus even just having the awareness of what makes it easier or harder for the person. We're just naming what has always been there, which is we're not all equally situated. And there is no perfect hour. I've
Right.
looked for it. So much as how do we optimize for voice, right? If we are now preferencing the real-time processors who communicate more effectively by talking, how do we build upon that to also incorporate and have avenues for the people who are post-processors and communicate more effectively by typing?
Access thousands of audiobooks and podcasts anytime, anywhere. From mysteries to self-help, there's something for everyone. Listen during your commute, workout, or downtime. Start your free 30-day trial at www.audibletrial.com/rdo and get your first audiobook free. Now back to the show.
Wow.
And the leader does set the tone in whether it's discussable, in whether we can try something new.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of small experiments, right? This
Yes.
is not, we're going to do it forever into perpetuity. This is, what are we going to try next?
Mm-hmm.
I have a hypothesis I want to test, and we try it for 3 weeks. If it doesn't work well, we can always go back.
Yeah.
But what might we learn?
Yeah. Yeah. I love this concept because it opens the door. It opens the door wider,
Mm.
if you will, for communication. I love what you said about it removes the barriers to engagement.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about, how difficult or how challenging is this in an organization where there has been organizational silence
Mhm.
and the leader has new skills.
Mhm.
They're reading this book. How difficult is it to change, right? Because we know changes can be challenging. So
Yeah.
and I want to go back to my old way as a
Yeah.
leader. I got a couple of leaders in mind. I have a couple of leaders in mind. I want to go back to the old way because that
Yeah.
is where I'm comfortable. But as
Yeah.
I think about the workplace
Mm.
is changing
Mhm.
every single day. There are
Mhm.
5 generations in a workplace. So where you have someone that says, put baby in the corner, or
Oh,
we don't want to hear from you, or that's not appropriate, or we don't do this. How do you shift? How do you make that shift? How difficult is it? What's needed to change?
willingness to try,
Mm,
willingness to be uncomfortable.
yeah.
And to those leaders, I'm not saying you have to change. I'm saying if you don't choose to change, no, make an informed decision about it, meaning that you are likely going to alienate certain people. You
Mhm.
are likely going to be missing out on information and perspectives. You are likely to not be as innovative. And if you're okay with that and it's working well enough for you, you do you.
Mhm.
And I would also ask each of us the question, who does my silence, my reverting to my holy, going with my unconscious habits, who does my silence serve?
Mm.
Who might it harm?
Mhm.
Because those of us who have the privilege to choose to remain the same are often the ones for whom the system is working well enough,
Absolutely.
which is not true for everyone.
No.
And I would take it back to voice is not just the words you say or don't say in a meeting.
Mhm.
Voice is how you move through the world. So if you have one life to live, how do you want to be leading? How do you want to be living? How do you want to impact the sphere of influence that you have?
Mhm.
For me, I want to be building cultures of voice, meaning spaces and places that people feel seen, heard, known, and in that, able to do your best work.
Yeah.
That's the vision I'm building toward. And it's not a vision that we all share because there are different bottom lines that we're going for.
Yeah.
But really interrogate that for yourself as a leader. How do I want to lead? Because we have a choice. We do not have to replicate the things that we have known or the things that we have seen.
Yes. As a matter of fact, as we're unlearning silence, how about we look at what are the things we need to unlearn
Yeah.
and relearn in
Yeah.
order to lead more effectively, more humanely. As you were talking, I was thinking about a client I had when I first started my business, and we called her a relationship killer. She would just
Mhm.
walk in a room and just leave bodies of employees
Oh,
just laying around, right? And just wasn't open
yeah.
to looking at her communication style. She
Yeah.
wasn't open to really listening and hearing. And as we're talking, I think about because of the generation that she came from.
Totally.
And so, I know we've talked about if you're a leader and you choose to keep kind of going back to the old ways, you're not willing to try, you're alienating people, you're not going to be as innovative. Can you speak to the different generations? Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and this is chapter 1 of the book of how we learned silence,
Mhm.
right? Because when I hear someone with that profile, I'm like, oh, what scar tissue do they have? What did they learn along the way about how to survive in the workplace, particularly if you're a woman in a male-dominated environment,
Mhm.
that leads you to this behavior?
Mhm.
And I'm not actually blaming them
Yeah.
because I could imagine that that's part of how they maybe survival from their perspective.
Mhm.
I do ask the question if I were coaching them to say, how do you actually want to lead? How do you want to lead? That could be legacy, that could be brand, whatever language you want to put around it.
Mhm.
Maybe you get shit done, you get results, but at what cost?
Yeah.
And cost that you may or may not see. You don't see those bodies, they just leave quietly.
Mhm.
Are you okay with that, knowing Laura Tabby out of Australia has a great statistic of on average, it takes 22 months to recover from a toxic workplace.
At a minimum.
Right, average.
At
At a
a
minimum.
minimum, right? Yeah.
How
Yes.
much life are we stealing from people who are sisters, brothers, mothers, caregivers, fathers, human beings?
Mhm.
The amount of time and energy that it goes into trying to heal from, make sense of, choose a different way, recover, when you may or may not have actually meant that. So what are you really trying to achieve? And can we minimize the collateral damage? Because oftentimes we can.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it takes awareness. And this is why we started the conversation of whether or not you acknowledge silence, it's there. Right? We learned it. It manifests in different ways. I've talked with lots of people who say, I don't need your book because I always speak out. Okay.
You might speak out at work, but where do you not speak out?
Yeah, well, that too. Right. But also, just because you are speaking out all the time doesn't mean that you haven't felt the need to censor or hide parts of yourself.
I can hear a leader saying, especially with the Gen Z population, generation, I can hear a leader saying, it would be total bedlam in the workplace if people were just coming in and just speaking and not censoring themselves and not, triggering everybody.
Yeah.
Again, I think it goes back to something you said about understanding the culture fit, read the room. And so can you speak to that generation,
Yeah. I want to be really clear. I'm going to get a little lawyerly. For the avoidance of doubt, unlearning silence does not mean saying everything to everyone all the time, everywhere. The world is too noisy and complex for that. Unlearning silence does mean being aware of when and where you are using your voice, for what purpose, and also why and how you might actually be using silence strategically. And so chapter 3 is when silence makes sense, because typically you hear it, you got to speak up, you got to do it. And I'm like, that ignores a whole host of real issues and costs that we may or may not bear. To the limitlessness, I would ask the question of what impact are you having on other people? Because there is common decency and respect that feels like the lines are really blurry right now. And also to acknowledge that if no one has ever given you candid performance coaching or evaluation, and you've just been reorged or passed on or middle of the road, then someone saying to you, you're having a really negative impact on this department and these people can feel like harassment. Because it's not what you're used to. Again, we can look for those leverage points to contextualize, but the common sense, common decency is the limit of how I still have a personal and professional responsibility to understand and own the impact I'm having on the people around me.
Yeah.
Because it is not all about me.
Yeah.
And unlearning silence is also being really clear as a leader. When am I actually asking for your opinion and when am I not?
Yes.
Because one of the ways that we as leaders end up silencing other people is to say, I really care about what you think. And someone offers an opinion, you're like, actually, that decision's already made. There's nothing we can do about it. And then those people are like, well, then why did I take all the time and energy to craft this deck, to have this conversation with you, etc.? So in the book, I offer the tool, classic coaching tool of 3 buckets. There's a million different variations around this, but in every decision, there is a decision maker or decision makers. But let's be clear, who's making the call here? Second bucket, who is consulted? I'm actually asking you for your opinion, and your job in that moment is to tell me what you really think. Bring your evidence, bring your data, give me your best reasoning, advocate loud and hard for it. And let's be clear that if you're being consulted, you're not actually the decision maker. Because as a decision maker, I'm going around to consult everyone, getting lots of different inputs, and then in the end, I make the decision, and I also own the decision. And there's a third bucket of people that I call informed, meaning you're not consulted, you're not deciding, you just find about it find out about it after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
CEOs, for example, should not be making decisions on what the catered lunch is going to be. To me, that is not a good use of your time, energy, efficient, hourly rate, whatever it is.
Yes.
Right? So someone else is making that decision. And as the CEO, you're probably informed. You find out what lunch is when you find out.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are clear, the aim is clarity rather than assuming that I'm a decision maker when I'm not, that I am consulted when I'm not, or that even Gen Z is that you should have an opinion about everything. Sometimes you are going to be informed. But the respect that I as a leader can offer everyone on my team is to be really clear about who's in what bucket from my point of view. If you want to negotiate around which bucket you're in, let's have that negotiation. And I'm often asking, okay, who's the decision maker?
Yeah.
And if it's not clear who's making that decision, let's have that conversation too.
Elaine, these 3 buckets, I think if leaders only take one thing away from our conversation, take these 3 buckets, because I think that this will clarify a lot. There are people in organizations who feel like, well, I'm a decision maker, but really you're not. You're a consultant.
You're a decision maker on what issue?
Right, on what issue?
Yeah. You should hold decisions.
Yeah.
CEOs, you're going to bottleneck everybody if everything is your decision, or people don't feel like you've got their back because maybe you've thrown them under the bus or overrode their decision.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another key piece of leadership is when are you delegating that decision where you either put yourself in the consult bucket or you put yourself in the inform bucket and you stick to it.
And you stick to it. Ooh. Yeah, it's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. It is, we talk a lot about organizational cultures and, what's happening in psychological safety and, so many things. But I think this is a key that creates a lifestyle within an organization, which contributes to the organizational culture, which contributes to psychological safety, which contributes to innovation, because now people are sharing their ideas and what bucket you're in and when it's time to share, or I'm being informed. So your feelings aren't hurt because you didn't get to add to the idea, because as employees in an organization, you're not gonna have the full plans. You're gonna have the piece of the puzzle that you need for that moment, for that time,
And let's also be clear that as a leader, we don't have the full plans either.
Absolutely.
Right? Which is why we need that perspective, and we need to own the decisions that we make.
Mm-hmm.
But we can have that clarity, which then also lets me know how to use my energy, how to use my voice, where to spend my social capital, where not to, and make informed decisions. And it also gives us language to say, hey, I would really like to be consulted on this. Or I think you're the decision maker. You think I'm the decision maker. Well, we gotta figure that one out.
Yeah.
Gives us language. Because the lack of clarity creates a lot of these friction points. And just to be really clear that no organization can run on consensus.
Can you say that again? It's an illusion.
No organization can run on consensus unless you're in an organization of one.
Absolutely.
And trying to have everyone in the decision-making bucket is trying to run on consensus, and you cannot do that. You just can't do business. And so often when we talk about inclusive leadership, leaders translate that to, I've got to include everyone in my decision, which, by the way, is different than everyone deciding together. But also, you cannot include everyone. You've got to figure out who are the key stakeholders impacted by this decision. What am I solving for? And to also be clear, you may or may not always get it right. And when you do not get it right, you own it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you own it. And not only do you own it, but you need to learn how not to let it keep happening.
Yeah.
People are okay with, well, I
Yes.
take ownership, but then they're going to know, okay, you've been taking ownership for quite a while now. What's next? What else do you
Whether this
have?
is the post-mortem, whether this is the after action review, whether this is what worked well, what are we going to do differently?
Mhm.
Right? What are we going to do differently? So we're not making the same mistakes over and over.
Yeah. You mentioned that you wanted to talk about the open door policy and why my door is always open and why that's not a good thing.
I mean, I'll be quick here, knowing as we're wrapping up our time. If people want to go deep on it, there's a Harvard Business Review article by Megan Reitz that is fantastic of what's problematic about saying my door is always open. But part of that is, do you even have a door? If I am lower on the org chart, I may not have a door, I may not even have a cubicle. And these days, right? But there's if I have the luxury of saying my door is always open, it means I have a door to open and close as I choose, and that we are meeting on my turf. Versus some of the meeting design things that we talked about, the wiring design choices that we could make. And if what we really mean is, I want to hear what you think, even asking, what do you think, can feel like a trap. So for leaders, I would say use standard questions like, what are the pros and cons? What about this works, doesn't work? What resonates about this idea? What doesn't resonate? So that you're not just getting that toxic positivity in one slice of perspective. No one needs to speak up to push back. Right. So much as we always ask these questions on our team, in this org, we always ask pros, cons, so that you get a more balanced perspective by the questions that you've baked into the agenda. It takes the stress off the relationship.
Yeah, I love that. Here's some questions not to ask. Don't ask these questions. Yeah. Elaine, I read somewhere that you live and work on Ohlone land.
Yeah.
How's this acknowledgement of Indigenous heritage influenced your perspective on unlearning silence? And what lessons can leaders and organizations draw from Indigenous wisdom when it comes to creating more inclusive and vocal environments?
Yeah. Well, I think we all should be reading Indigenous writers, authors, listening to speakers. And when I say Ohlone land, that is more commonly known as Berkeley, California. I have a complicated relationship with this because I'm an immigrant from Taiwan to the United States.
Okay.
My parents came here as part of the quota of highly skilled people from Asia after the ban against folks like us was lifted. And feel like I inherited this really complicated history that many of us don't want to talk about. And yet staying silent or banning books doesn't actually solve the issues that were there. It just makes them go underground, and it disproportionately impacts people from whom land was stolen, and means that we are more likely to replicate history if we are not aware. So that acknowledgement to me is, even where I sit literally right now, is complicated history. I cannot change the past, but I can influence the future. So what choices am I going to make about acknowledging reality as I understand it, to at least offer my perspective into the collective data set? Because the more of us that stay silent, there is a narrative being formed Someone else is telling the story.
Yeah.
Rather than what might be missing because of the voices we silence. And there is enough silencing all of us based on visible and non-visible, apparent, non-apparent identities. Let me not add to my own silencing.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it is, as I talk about and parse in chapter 3, silence that is strategic, that is necessary sometimes for survival and self-care and self-preservation.
Mm-hmm.
And let me be really honest with myself when I say, oh, I'm playing the long game, right? When I enter the C-suite, then I'll speak up because then I'll have leverage. Will you?
Right.
Will you?
You
Or are
already
you just
have a
telling
history
yourself that?
of not speaking up. They're used to you not speaking up. And in some situations, that's why they bring you into the C-suite, because they know you're not going to speak up. I'm just saying.
All of it, right? There's so many layers there. And the
Mhm.
less we talk about the layers and the complexity, the more likely we are each to internalize that I'm the problem or I'm the only one.
Yeah.
And my joining the conversation and lending my perspective is to say, let me own what I can own, which is, what do I see? I see that this framing of just speak up, have more confidence is off.
Yeah.
Let me name what I think is the more honest and accurate question so that we have a better chance at solving it. However uncomfortable, however non-linear, but with a much better chance at honoring the dignity of every human being that we have the privilege to encounter.
That is so powerful. I love that you're doing this work, because it's going to, I think, push the needle forward with how we communicate, how we engage, how we interact, how we honor each other as individuals. And you don't have to be like me, and I don't have to be like you, but we
No.
can still work together, and
Yeah.
there's still value in our difference.
And how do I celebrate the best of you? Because
Yeah.
you succeeding does not take away from my success. But together we are actually greater than the sum of its parts. If I got the phrase right.
Yeah.
I keep telling myself not to use idioms because I never get them right. That's a cost of English second language.
But we know what you're talking about.
Great,
So
I love it.
Elaine, what are you reading that we should be reading?
Yeah. So one of the beautiful things about being an author is I get a sneak peek at some books that are coming down the pipeline.
Yeah.
I'm currently reading 2 books that I think everyone needs to read. Number 1 is by Jen Kim, called Unicorn Team.
We love Jen Kim. She's been on our podcast. She's our friend, and we've been waiting for Unicorn Teams.
Well, and let me plug it specifically. What she breaks down in terms of leadership. So often people say, oh, my right-hand person, right? We've at least evolved from right-hand man, but right-hand person, that right-hand person can often feel like I'm second string, versus Unicorn Teams. Someone needs to be a visionizer, someone needs to be a strategizer, someone needs to bring it to life. And that recognition that everyone on the team is really valuable, even if we have different skill sets, and not just valuable, but necessary, is so powerful. The second book I am reading is The Doors You Can Open by Rosalind Chow, who's an organizational psychologist out of Carnegie Mellon. And what I'm really excited about with The Doors You Can Open is it's talking about sponsorship and the importance of sponsorship, meaning don't just mentor, don't just tell me, give me advice, whatever version of mentorship, but really, how can I open doors for you? And have some skin in the game in that regard. And both are really exciting reads that I am excited for them to continue to transform the way that we lead.
Yes. I am so glad you shared those books. I know I will be adding them to my reading list, and I hope that our listeners do the same. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We've been chatting with Elaine Hering. Visit the show notes to see how to connect with Elaine. While you are in the show notes, be sure to grab a copy of Unlearning Silence, How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully, and Results-Driven Organizations, the 4 Keys to Our High-Performance Workplace. While you're there, grab our 2024 Leaders Reading List, our special gift to you for being a valuable listener. Until next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Results Driven Organizations Podcast with Dr. Tanya Lowe. Be sure to review the show notes for the resources mentioned, and don't forget to grab your free gift available at freegiftfromtanya.com. Until next time.